We are recording.
Awesome. Welcome to the SIG Auth meeting for November 15th, 2017. So it looks like we have a pretty short agenda. This is likely because of the first announcement, and that is Code Freeze is coming. Code Freeze will be on November 22nd. We've started adding a few items to the milestone, but one second. We've started adding a few items to the milestone, but if you have any PRs that are open and not merged and need to get them into 1.9, please get someone's attention, specifically me or Liggett or David Eads, and we can go ahead and add that to the correct milestone and label it with SIG Auth. I believe Code Freeze will require at least look good to me and approval. At least that's what was happening last time. So please do contact us if there's something that we're missing. Awesome. We have no demos today, so we'll just move on to PRs of note. And the first item is something that I put on there and wanted to sort of discuss a little bit. Somebody opened and I apologize because I think they used an alias for their PR. Someone opened a OpenID Connect user login flow for a kubectl auth subcommand. This is so today with a kubectl and kubectl, we have a way of configuring something called an auth provider. The available auth providers that I'm aware of are an OpenID Connect one, a GCP one, a Azure one, and a Keystone one. What the auth providers do is they look at your environment, or they are configured in some capacity to be able to rotate bearer tokens. So as you're using kubectl, the plugin will grab a bearer token from your configuration, rotate it if necessary, and do that kind of thing. So you're always authenticated against the API server. While it does allow you to set that up in some way, it has always been an idea that these auth providers would eventually allow you to actually log in to your provider in the first place to get a bearer token. So all the auth providers today require that you already have done some sort of login through an external system. You've downloaded a kubectl with these values, and it will continue to do the rotation, but it won't allow you to actually take something and, as an unauthenticated user, become authenticated. So what this PR does is it adds a new subcommand to kubectl. The exact sort of interaction with SIG CLI hasn't been spec'd out yet. It turned out that this PR at least didn't go through the proposal process for SIG CLI yet, but it certainly is kind of interesting. It just does a basic sort of OAuth 2 flow, launches a browser, you do your redirects, and get redirected to localhost. So I think it's definitely worth taking a look at. I don't imagine this would get into 1.9 just because it was open so late in the cycle. I know that, Liggett, you had some comments previously when we discussed something like this about tokens possibly being sent over localhost and using HTTP. I remember you saying something like that, but I just wanted to ask you again if that
was we're working on in the interim.
Sorry, what?
Oh, I thought you made peace with it. You're here. Never mind.
Yeah, the local device flow is not really a concern for me at this point. I do think for this we'd probably want a cleaner separation between the type of rotation mechanism and an actual login mechanism. Getting interactive commands popping up in the middle of what you thought was a non-interactive call probably isn't great. So I think a design and treating those two bits as separate and letting auth providers contribute some sort of interactive flow, either via a mechanism like this, or I think Mike Denise had talked about maybe leveraging some of the plugin capabilities. But yeah, it's interesting. I think it needs thought.
Yeah, I'd like to see a kick to SIG CLI to reconcile with their extension mechanism that they've been creating. Because I think in my ideal world, we would give someone the opportunity to the actual code provided, but would not live in tree Kubernetes.
I have a similar use case too. There's a mechanism now for GCP for basically plugging in a command to refresh a token. I started working on like an AWS sort of authenticator piece that I demoed at SIG AWS a couple weeks ago, and really wanted a similar kind of plugin interface in the kubectl to like, I run this command to generate a token. It's not there right now, so I think this would be a good. I'd like to make sure it covers that use case as well. It's not OIDC, it's custom token protocol.
Yeah, so I know that there's been, I think that getting the existing providers out of kubectl and into plugins is also a useful conversation, just because there's probably not a reason why kubectl should have Azure code or that kind of thing compiled in. My hope with this PR is that it potentially could just be generic OAuth 2 and not be specific to OpenID Connect, allowing us to do something like have other providers target it, versus it being tightly coupled to some proprietary mechanism.
But even with OAuth 2, there's multiple ways to actually sort of get to a refresh token, right? I mean, there's like a gazillion different flows that, and there's custom flows to be able to get there too. So like, I mean, so this would be login using the sort of the web-based sort of three-legged flow, name the thing, I don't know, right? But there's other ways to actually get to the point of stepping along. Somebody's really loud. I'm not sure who. Getting a lot of noise.
It got better. I definitely think that is definitely more OAuth flows than I can name that are possible. So that's something we should discuss. I think concretely for this one, not getting in for 1.9, we can sort of respond, or I'll respond that this needs to think about these sort of issues and hopefully come up with a proper proposal for something for 1.10.
So I think it's a great thing to solve also, by the way. So yeah, I just want to put my...
Can you guys hear me?
This has been on our list for a long time. Eric Chang had the first proposal here, I think.
Yeah. Also, Mike, we can't hear you.
All right, sorry, I was having some mic problems. I wanted to weigh in and just say that I think it would be very nice to advance our auth provider plugin mechanism a little more than it is today. Specifically, we have like 36 companies that are now conformant to, that have joined the Kubernetes conformance effort, and I don't think it's a scalable solution to build non-generic like a GCP or AWS integration into auth providers anymore. So I was looking and considering how to move some of this stuff out recently. The API is for building an auth providers very generic today, and I also wanted to extend auth provider support not just for kube control but for authenticating the Bootstrap client and in Kubelet for use cases like that. So I think the auth provider framework needs a bit of work. That said, I think OIDC is a reasonably standard enough that it makes sense to include in as a first class LinkedIn integration.
Yeah, I think that there are elements of this where it makes sense to think about it for kubectl because there's some user-facing interaction that you want to, like a CLI kind of interaction you want to orchestrate. But then there's also use cases like in client Go where, or Kubelet or something where you want to plug in at that point too. So I think potentially there's two layers of interface that need to be added. And some of it's already there.
Okay. Sounds good. I think we can sort of punt this to 110 planning then for now. I know that we're particularly interested in something like this, so I can tentatively say that I'll try to take a look at this and maybe summarize what we discussed here and work on that. Cool. I added these other two items to the proposal node just for, because I know that they'll be interesting to some people. I didn't actually have any specific things that I wanted to talk about for the KMS gRPC webhook, but that was added, or a pull request for that was submitted. At least this is part of the effort to enable KMS providers that are external to the API server, and not just the sort of built-in KMS providers that were actually removed recently.
So, I mean, on that, so this is a new type of webhook, but it's gRPC?
This sort of takes inspiration from, I wasn't on the specific design proposal, but this, I believe, takes inspiration from some of the kubelet gRPC APIs that exist, as well as, I guess, CSI would be the other gRPC-based webhook.
But this is the first time that we're actually calling out from the API server to other things using gRPC?
Yes, I believe so.
Yeah, it is.
So
it would still be sort of like a local host connection, though, right? Sort of expectation.
I
mean, this
The
doesn't.
plan is to use a domain socket for the actual connection. Yeah.
So I just posted an issue in the chat. I mean, there's this ongoing discussion around mission controllers in terms of what is the form for webhook calls there. Now, obviously, this is in some ways a little bit of a different beast, but there is this question of like how many different sort of forms of APIs do we have when people are implementing webhooks? This one.
This isn't an admission controller.
No. Okay, so admission controllers. As we went, as API machinery was going towards mutable admission controllers via webhooks, there's a discussion spawned from that is what is the form of the webhook? Should it actually use our traditional spec status, or should it actually move to a more gRPC-based response request type of thing? This hit last minute. We're going to talk about it at SIG architecture, and it spawned the issue that I linked here. What we're seeing in this issue with this PR is yet another new form of webhook that is actually different from all of our other webhooks. Right.
Is this a webhook, or is this more in the vein of like CNI, CRI type of APIs?
That's a good question. I think it was described just now as a webhook.
Yeah.
I think it's more akin to the CNI style callouts we have from kubelet, right? Like when you see what's needed to do this, right? In order to create a secret, you have to use it.
Don't get me wrong, it may be a different beast. I think it's just worth looking to see, like, this is yet another new way, in a new form, in a new sort of way that the API server is calling out. I think we expect that there's already a format in terms of how the kubelet calls out, and that has different requirements. This is interesting because it's not a traditional webhook, but it's also more akin to, I don't know, like to etcd in some ways, right?
Yeah, it's an IPC call of some form.
Yeah, and I apologize that I specifically wrote webhook. It's not referenced by the.
Yeah, and actually, there's another one too. I mean, we've got CNI flex volume is exec, CSI is gRPC, CRI is gRPC, authorizer, admission. All of the typed ones are actual API calls in a known format. The admission one is a generic format. This is definitely not generic. So we would definitely need to go through the, like gRPC is convenient, and we used it on the node because they didn't want to invent a new API machinery style on the node, which has no API machinery. But we are reinventing. We're using all the extension mechanisms possible.
Yeah,
the only thing we're not using is shared library.
The original suggestion for this came from Daniel Smith. It was kind of his idea to use gRPC. So, I'm not sure what kind of the direction is there, but that's kind of the history of why gRPC here is. That's what he suggested.
What's I hit?
Whose phone is ringing?
Wow. So one of the things that I'd like to see us do is get more formal about doing API reviews and actually have a documented sort of open process around that. Has this been sort of raised with the API reviewer folks? Because this is essentially a new API in our ecosystem.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out how it compares to existing ones and which type it is most like, and trying to avoid special snowflakes if there's an existing pattern that makes sense.
I just know every time in the past where we've done this, we've often regretted it. I mean, I'm looking at use, cluster status health or whatever that thing is called.
Oh God.
Hey Joe, 5 that you posted on the Zoom chat, that's new to me. Daniel and I worked on this proposal that we just saw for gRPC-based KMS plugins. If you want, I'm struggling with what's the curated set of mechanisms that we should pick from when we're building these. It's fine to change it. I'm perfectly happy to do that. But if there is a curated list of mechanisms, point me at it and we'll go figure out how to use one of those.
So this issue got raised when I brought up the point that we don't have a curated list of mechanisms, and so this was the issue for how do we actually start creating that? Because I was seeing the pattern where we were actually having discussions sort of ad hoc one by one, and it's like, can we actually start describing these patterns and making it easier to distribute the knowledge around sort of what works when and where and how? A part of that also is, can we bring some of the sort of API review stuff that's been happening also in a sort of one-on-one ad hoc manner into a sort of, into the light, into a more transparent process such that we can start building some institutional knowledge across a wider set of people around how this stuff works. But,
sure, if you want to subject this one to, if you want to subject this as a guinea pig to that process, I'm happy to work with you.
Now, is this going to be alpha in 1.9?
No, we agreed not to put this in 1.9, right?
No, it's not going to 1.9.
Oh, it's not going in 1.9. Okay.
No.
So we get a little bit of time.
Yeah, and it's replacing or in lieu of an alpha API, so I would expect the first drop of it to also be alpha.
The proposal actually has a couple interesting points in it. I don't know if looked like there was one thing Greg was expounding about pretty significantly. Was it key ID?
Yeah, I eventually decided I was wrong. So you can ignore that.
Okay. I looked through it, saw there was a lot of discussion, and then the conclusion was we don't need it, and I was like, yep, I think I agree. I don't think we need it.
Yeah.
So, but if anyone else was wondering if it was interesting, that was what I found to be most interesting.
So, okay, I'm not blocking anything or anything. I just wanted to make sure that we were having these discussions and connecting the dots here to just try and save some heartache later if we decide to try and bring this up together.
Yeah, so totally, Joe. I get that. I'd like to see this as alpha in at least part 10. So if we can, if you want to ping me offline, I'm more than happy to work with you on this.
Unfortunately, I'm not one of the API reviewers and an active, participant in API machinery. So I'm throwing pot shots to some degree, and I apologize for that. But I do want to just help connect these conversations.
And just to clarify too, that doc wasn't like a one-on-one doc with Daniel or anything. That was public. It was SIG Auth last week, and we got turned into code. So yeah.
And I guess what I'm trying to say is the API discussions about types of APIs and sort of the formats and all that stuff, that's being done in a kind of one-on-one type of thing versus actually what are our API conventions? How are we actually trying to drive to consistency across that's what I meant.
Okay. The last one was just one that I sort of had some questions about and wanted to get some. One second. Sorry, it's noisy in downtown San Francisco. The next one is about about nodes being able to impersonate service accounts for pods that are bound to them. So this is part of the node authorizer and would allow nodes to act on behalf of that. I wanted to bring this up because it seemed like there was a little bit confusion about why specifically we want to allow this. It does seem to follow logically that that is in the scope of a node's power, because it already is mounting the secret and that kind of thing. It's handling the secret. But I just wanted to get some clarification and chat with Mike about that if he has any thoughts.
Yeah, so this was very useful in my prototyping that I've been doing around the job minting. I wanted to publish all of my prototypes, so I decided to send out this PR. I don't expect it to get in 1.9 or in its current form, but I wanted to start discussion of how a node node credentials could be used to receive pod credentials and how that auth flow would work. The node authorizer is very useful in this situation because it already has the graph of node to pod to service account. So it was easy for me to shim it in there. It's I think I would have had to duplicate that and also add a webhook authorizer if I wanted to build this into a separate process. So I would have had to basically copy all that node authorizer code. The other thing is it's not particularly easy to configure multiple webhook authorizers. So maybe that's something that we might want to consider supporting if we want to support stuff like this outside of core. But yeah, so that's basically why this PR exists. But I'm interested to hear your ideas. So what I was doing is I was taking the node credentials, using that from a node agent to request from the Kubernetes API on behalf of a pod that was starting up if I could get a JOT signed. So that seemed to work. There's no context on, there's no way using RBAC or sorry, the subject access review to infer context of why this delegation is being made that I know of. So it might be useful to carry context like this impersonation is happening by this user for this user in this specific context, like accessing this specific API, but none of that is carried forward. So if we wanted to add constraints, we might want to add to the subject access review, but it kind of goes to show that subject access review might not, in its current form or with the current information that it carries, might not be fully suitable to make all authorization decisions that we might want to make. But that's kind of the point that I got to. Do you guys have any comments?
I have a question, I guess. I remember we were going to try embedding a JOT signer inside of the Kube API server, and then make requests to have one signed for a particular identity. Why not just let the node be allowed to request one for the service accounts bound to it? Is it just that you'd have to duplicate the graph? And if that was the concern, it seems like you could do a secondary check. Are you allowed to sign? Is this user allowed to sign for this other user? Similar to the secondary auth check that the impersonation API uses.
So add that to the API such that when you submit a JOT request, you are requesting for a specific subject, and it is not implied that the subject is the requester, is what you're saying? Yeah,
it seems like it would be a useful thing, right? I mean, not that there won't. Yeah, it seems like that would just be a generally useful thing, right? Like a user who has the power to use the service account may also deserve to be allowed to get one, get a jot sign for it, or other identities too, like maybe some way I can get a jot sign for a node.
Yeah, the use case. So, and like I think when we were talking about this too, like it really came down to, do we want to say that running a pod as a service account is effectively the equivalent of being able to be the service account? And that's kind of a conceptual thing. Like I totally agree, David, that there's other ways we can slice it. That was kind of the question I had was, a node is fundamentally acting as the pod and therefore the service account by its very nature. We could do that as a separate check. It did feel like this gets at the heart of what a service account is.
Although, if I thought we were wanting to move in a direction of attenuating the service account by the node it was running on, and even possibly one day figuring out how to make that inform authorization decisions. Like we're not there yet, but if I'm a node, I should not necessarily be able to do everything the service account can do against everything in the world. Like it's a service account on a pod on me is sort of the intersection of the dimensions.
I have to get the secret that.
Yeah, today, absolutely, it's undifferentiated. But I thought the goal of some of the minting credentials per pod per service account was to get away from, one secret and it's shared by all nodes who see that service account, and make it more traceable to the chain of the node to the secret for the service account.
So I think there's a difference between being able to make authorization decisions based on which node it is versus being able to actually audit and revoke based on the node.
Absolutely. One, you have to have the chain before you could ever hope to make authorization decisions. I don't know that we would ever get to the point where we would do authorization, although I will say, like, I see people wanting to like run a daemon set and be able to partition what that can do on each node. So like the
daemon set getting credentials to do only the thing that the same node can do is a huge problem right now, because we've done all this work for nodes where the node can only do certain things. You have two choices. If you have a daemon set that also needs access to the pod info, you can give it the node credentials, and so they can do everything the node can do, including reading secrets. Or you can give it a service account token that lets it do everything, which completely defeats the purpose of having the kubelet have.
Yeah, the authorization bit is a secondary case. I don't want to derail on that.
Yeah, that seems like a different discussion. So the one thing that I would worry about here is that is this going to show up in an audit log anyplace, right? The fact that this delegation is going on.
No matter what, it has to, I think.
Yeah, audit includes all impersonation. So it says this user made this request on behalf of this user to do this thing. Like all of that is in auditing.
But this seems like this is another, like if I heard Mike correctly, this is another sort of like, and it's impersonation, but not using the existing impersonation flows, right?
No, the way impersonation works, you make a request that says, I want to do this operation as this user. You have to be authorized to do that request. Okay. You have to be authorized to impersonate.
And so this is actually doing impersonation also. Actually saying yes to impersonation, not actually doing it. Gotcha.
Right. And if I can see it's useful for like requesting a JOT or a credential for that service account. But I think David's point of if we want a node to request a credential for a service account, I think having both of those parties in the request rather than kind of modeling it as an impersonation requesting for myself would make sense.
I think that's reasonable, but I also want to make it clear that I don't see us in the short term or ever. I don't know if it's possible for us to live in a world where the node root on node with node credential cannot get access to a service account credential for pods running on that node. Is that understood by the group, or does anybody?
Actually, I disagree with that, because we could run.
Go ahead, Joe.
We could run the kubelet in a restricted mode where the container runtime is running out of process, and the identity provider, something like the Spire agent or something similar, could then actually sort of be the one who attests to and actually provides credentials there. So
I said root on node, so I said root.
Root. Okay, root. Yeah. But right now we assume kubelet kind of has root-ish, but like that may not always be the case. I don't know.
Yeah, so specifically in the case where somebody has fully owned a node, I don't know if there's a way that we can, a world that we can live in where they don't have access to every single service count of workloads running on that node.
I disagree with that, because I think a node is a separate entity from the service running on top of it, right? The service credential belongs to the service, doesn't belong to the node. The node can say, hey, I don't want this service to run me, and then kill the service. But the node shouldn't, even the root shouldn't get the credential of the service, because the credential of the service belongs to the service, not the node, right?
I'm saying like maliciously get access to, though.
The distinction without a difference, because if you have root, you can read memory and you can intercept all network calls, and there's nothing that you can do. Like, we're not trying to defend against that unless we were to say the kubelet wouldn't run as root, and that's never going to happen. Like, the kubelet, I mean, maybe 3 years from now, but like in the short term, like I don't see the distinction as being useful.
Yeah, and I can see at some point there being some sort of esoteric sort of Intel feature that lets people, use VME type of stuff, but like that's later.
We've definitely talked about the kubelet rejecting workloads by asking a trusted party, but as long as like whoever gets to run root processes or runs as root, we might as well just put the barricade there and have a little bit of an internal abstraction. I guess like I feel like we're making a distinction that's not actually going to lead to a better security outcome in the near term if we don't like at least think through this in this context. Like the node is asking for the permission to get the credentials to run a workload that it's been told to run. In order for it to run those credentials, now we could still have an access control check. The pod can say, this pod doesn't get a service account token injected. We could add an authorizer check to say we refuse to grant this to you because this pod didn't give those credentials, but it's still kind of meaningless because.
I guess I look at it from the perspective of would I want the information to be able to accept the JOT signing request? Do I see general utility in the idea of I want to request a JOT for that? And if I were to sign for a JOT, would I want to have some indication of true origin? And I think the answer to all those things for me is yes.
Yeah.
So I don't object to the intent, right? Like, should a node be able to get it? Yeah, absolutely. But being able to get it via impersonation, I think hides some information from me that I would like to have.
So, David, like in this case, we were talking about, you said embedded earlier. This would not be embedded. This would be running as a plugin. In theory, we want to take this out of the core. And so then the API to mint the JOTs and the webhook authorization is essentially a very trusted process, but it's running separately. So it is, the nodes are talking to that's talking back to the master to make a decision about whether to sign the JOT because it's strictly more powerful than the API server because it controls authorization to the API server. They're not strictly more, but it is the root of trust rather than the downstream.
Yes, I don't think that includes passing information either, right?
Yeah, I was just saying like that's a useful way to think about like it's making all the decisions. It's okay for it to do additional checks if it has to. I kind of suggested the impersonation because like we keep saying that the permission to impersonate something is the permission to go act as it, and the node is acting as the pod. And that was a hang up for me. But I won't go to the wall for it.
Yeah, I think from an access and security perspective, they are equivalent. So it's just what we want the API to be, what we want the model to be.
Awesome.
Anyways,
so it seems like
I'll continue to prototype and maybe write up some of what we said today.
Awesome. Thanks. I'll just note that it's part of your prototype. So it doesn't look like we have anything for designs of notes of discussions, unless anyone here has something that I missed out on. If not, somebody says something.
I was going to say, I'm really tempted to start solutioning on how do we extend RBAC to start handling these extended things, including like, you know, secrets in a sort of more fine-grained way. And I know there's been a ton of discussion there, and I haven't paged all that in. I don't know if like these new scenarios are worthwhile to you know, noodle on that some more, or if people have time or
the secret use case you bring up is a particularly tricky one in light of the targeted watch that Wojtek proposed a design for maybe 2 releases back. Not that it's a bad goal, but that example in particular is tricky.
Yeah. Because I'm thinking about things like the biggest problem is that RBAC doesn't have enough context around the resources that it's authorizing, right? Could we model this in terms of actually another authorizer, a way to essentially have an alternate representation of a resource that is essentially other information that goes into the RBAC type decision? Is there a way that we can actually sort of have a bunch of things annotate resources with extra context that RBAC can use?
If you had a list of what you were thinking about, I just picked on secret because it was the first one that you mentioned, but if you had a list of other things you were thinking about, I'd be very interested in looking at it. Most of what I've seen has either been around what amounts to field or label selectors on resources.
I think that's part of it. I mean, even something like with secret, the secret type could be huge, right?
That's a field selector. So yeah, I agree. You could get big benefits, but I think having a specific list to talk about will help us target it.
Yeah.
Joe, are you thinking that there is additional context about the resources that is used in authorization?
Well, I mean, that's essentially how, like, I think it's worthwhile to go through the exercise of what is all the stuff that goes into the node authorizer. Is there a way that we could deliver that stuff in a more generic way that sort of plays better with RBAC itself, right? And could we actually both solve that scenario along with the secret watch scenario, along with this impersonation scenario, right? Could we actually come up with something that lets us be you know, move past the point where we're writing specialized authorizers?
So a couple things there. One, the node authorizer doesn't actually get any additional context on the incoming request. So the the things it makes its decision on could be done already with a manifested RBAC policy. So like not shortcomings, but the gaps that we see where you're making authorization decisions based on contents of requests, we actually still have to have an admission plugin for the node segmentation.
Okay, so what you're saying is that it's conceivable that the node authorizer could be done by having something twiddling RBAC rules in a fast and furious manner, right?
Right, and the fact that every cluster has kubelets, and at scale, that's probably going to be the hotspot. That's why we had a custom one. But for lower scale, slower moving things like a controller that needs a secret for an ingress, you know, you're probably not rotating your certs hundreds of times a second. I hope you're not.
Well, okay, but like, okay, so let's say that like we took a secret and we actually had on the secret, we annotated it with the list of nodes that the secret could actually go to, and we made that accessible via RBAC in some way.
It's really useful to like write down and read some of the stuff that's already there, because trying to make authorization decisions based on the content of the thing that you're retrieving, which I think is what I heard you describe, is something that is both not possible with the authorization that we have set up today, but even at the deeper levels like admission isn't wired to work today, and the semantics around watching something like that are far less than obvious since it wouldn't match normal cube semantics as things enter and leave. So it's very interesting to talk about. I have spent some time.
That's why I saved it to the end.
Yeah, and having a write-up that describes it where we can comment and point out likely problems and conflicts we're going to have is going to be helpful, right? OpenShift actually did create an ACL filtered view on some resources. And it is something we learned a lot doing, and it's very expensive. And the API still does not work like a normal Cube API. So I think it's going to need some deep exploration, and people are likely going to need some significant background.
I'd like to point out that with the addition of conditions like these, it starts to resemble something that is not RBAC. And if we use RBAC in a way that there's one role binding to one subject, then we are probably using the wrong form of policy declaration.
All
right,
access control.
I didn't catch that. I'm sorry.
Starting to feel more like ABAC.
Yeah.
A hybrid of ABAC and RBAC, where you're using attributes to make decisions. It's almost like we don't need to talk about it now.
Well, is anybody actively trying to figure out how to solve our secret problem?
There are so many secret problems.
Which one?
Secret problem.
Right, so here's what I do is I do my TGIK every week where I explore something, and I look at the manifest before I actually go and install something, and half of them let these components list all secrets even though they need a subset of secrets.
So the big one on that is what Mike was doing. So Mike and I have kind of sketched this, and Matt has been, we talked about this in container identity as well, like Greg's been involved in a bunch of discussions, but that's take service accounts out of secrets. If service account tokens aren't in secrets, secrets immediately drop from being you can get root access to the entire cluster the moment you have secret to you can get access to secrets then done. So that's step one.
I'm not buying it, Clayton, because like even if the service account secrets don't make it in there, people are going to store other secrets in there. Like
step one. So step one is
it's a good step.
Well, no, because like today, even if you run something like the attack angle today is even in a single namespace, if you grant access to secrets there, you are as powerful as any service account in that. So you can get no.
Well, but let's be clear. Within a namespace, if you grant people access to create pods, you essentially get there too.
Exactly.
Right?
But if you take that out, like there's a set of like I think there's like two levels. There's the cluster level, and then there's the workload level. The moving the service accounts out help both because you stop having to reason about this huge problem of.
I still don't like the fact that my ingress controller has access to my database.
Yes.
So as an example of how to solve that one, Joe, 2 releases ago, Wojtek wrote up a proposal for a watch on a specific resource.
Right.
So that you would be able to say, I want to watch this one, and I want to watch that one, and I want to watch the other one. And for an ingress controller, I think that's exactly what you would like to be able to do, right? I have the names, I want to be able to watch that one and that one and that one. And he had a proposal to do it. The proposal, I think we even merged it. Didn't we merge that, Clayton? I remember reviewing it several times.
We merged it, and it probably needs a good shake. But
the concept there was very good. For that use case, that was a problem that we didn't solve with an authorizer. We solved it with a new concept in API machinery, a specific get that gets muxed through.
And then the expectation is that people will write a ton of like individual small z, 1z, 2z RBAC rules.
And they're cheap, yeah, because the scope of that is typically smaller than the sub of every other resource. Like if you're giving access to your ingress to all secrets anyway, you have a problem. The 1z case has to get easier though, and maybe this is to Mike's point. Like if it's still hard to do 1z rules because you're creating a role and a binding and a subject at the same time.
There's a role and a binding.
Yeah.
So what about?
I think instead of sort of manually 1z, 2z rules too, you could write a controller that looks at ingress objects, decides which secrets ingress controller should have access to, And
right, the expectation would be like a user comes with their object, and in this object schema, it references a secret. And then as part of the controller or the installing the controller for that, you give the controller permissions to access secrets referenced that way. And so it's manifesting a policy from those objects.
that kind of that granular watch, individual object watch, is also the reason why secrets and config maps update asynchronously on the kubelet, right? Like
it was initially intended for the kubelet, and we said, instead of solving this a different way, let's, because web consoles have this problem too. Anybody who has a lot of controllers has a watch problem. And if you're dealing with anything less than cluster scope, you still have a watch problem. You have lots and lots of little watch problems. And so this was like, can we solve these all together? Because we also, dirty secret, we don't recheck authorization after you open a watch. So if you open a watch and then take that person's access away until the watch times out, which coincidentally is 10 minutes because of a bug in etcd today, so we're safe, but only by accident, you would still have permission. We need to check those watches so that.
Yeah. So let me get this straight. So if we had this watch mechanism, what I would do is I create a new ingress object. It references a secret that holds my TLS. Let's ignore kube Lego, insert manager, and stuff like that. I then have to write an RBAC rule that allows the service account that ingress is running under to get access to that particular secret. And it's me, the ones who has to actually sort of explicitly whitelist the service account for the ingress controller to get access to my secret, right?
No, not necessarily. I mean, the administrator that has chosen what is going to satisfy those ingress objects knows who needs to be granted access. And so I would expect the thing that set up the ingress controller to come in and try to satisfy those ingresses to also give it permission. And they could give it permission.
Another controller that essentially twiddles the RBAC rules automatically.
Yeah.
I think that's still a lot safer because that second controller is not handling user data.
Right. It lets you separate it from, so you don't have to put it in the same place as your ingress controller, which is exposed to the world. I could even see being able to tell that thing how to write policies in a generic way. Like, look at these objects. This JSON path references a secret granted to this component, and that way you could use it against multiple different.
So this is a new type of controller. It's an RBAC controller, essentially.
Yeah. Jordan, how do you prevent confused deputy there? Do you have to have additional metadata in a policy, either on the object or whatever, that says this is intended for this use?
I mean, if it's something like ingress, you can, if you have a single object like an ingress and you want to target it to different things, well, how are you going to target it today? You're going to do it with labels, I guess, or by namespace.
Well,
those are your two options.
No. An ingress references a secret by name. So then
okay.
if I can edit that ingress, I can change what secret it references. And then I can access any secret by name because there has to be a policy on the controller side that's giving RBAC that says, who do I give RBAC to? So you still need there has to be a two-sided thing. If ingress can reference any secret, then you can.
Yeah, you could require it to be two-sided if you wanted.
Well, the thing is, if you don't do it, then we haven't actually improved security because.
Yeah, but the point isn't exactly how you grant that RBAC permission. The point is that you could actually write something to automatically grant that permission via RBAC if you wanted to. But the ingress controller in particular, the thing that's reading the secret, doesn't have to have full access. It could use a particular, like, get me this one or watch this particular one.
It is also true right now that ingress controllers need write access to ingress objects, update status.
Status does not let them update spec, does it?
Yeah, no. You can write an RBAC rule on the sub resource. So
right.
That's safe.
And the benefit of this approach is that from the user's perspective, they don't care. They just, here's my ingress, here's my secret. From the ingress controller's perspective, it doesn't care. It just does a get today and hopefully someday soon has the ability to watch individual secrets so it can get updates. It doesn't know that it's being authorized. It doesn't know whether it's being authorized broadly or narrowly. It's just following links from ingress objects and getting the data it needs. And then at the authorization layer, if you don't care about this and you just want to say, you know what, list all your secrets, whatever, you can, or you could give particular access based on one-way links or two-way links or however you wanted to, whatever you wanted to base that on. It makes the different layers not have to think about each other, which is what you want.
There is an issue here where this stuff is going to be more async than it was before, and so the ingress controllers are going to have to be a little bit more resilient to retrying if they get an auth failure.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, we have that today, right? I mean, even the RBAC authorizer works off of a informer fed cache. So if you create a role and then immediately try to do something, you might get forbidden for a millisecond or two. If you set up a pod that references a secret and the kubelet races the node authorizer before the graph is updated and tries to fetch the secret, yeah, it might get forbidden and have to retry. But
you can actually see this in the E2E logs today. Every E2E Kube API server has a whole bunch of access denieds at the beginning. It's this problem. I guess the one point though is if it's not easy, we can't explain this. Like, so the easiest thing today is everybody grants access to all secrets. So the way to solve that is to give someone an equivalent that feels just as easy that they start doing. Is that something that makes it easier to give one-off secret access to something? Like either a command or something that makes it easy to go say, I want to give this user this secret right now?
Yeah, to be clear, I'm not...
You want to be able to grant a grantee timed access to a particular secret. And after the time expires, that grant is revoked.
I don't know about timed access.
To be clear, I'm not against the idea of show me all the X's that I can see. I think that would be an awesome feature. But I don't see that as directly related to the particular kind of authorization choice. And I think that a lot of use cases can actually be solved differently. So, like I said, when you write something up, I'd be very interested to see it, read it, and comment on it.
And Clayton, I think the thing that people are doing now that is making it difficult for the future is the access patterns more than the authorization they're using.
They're writing informers for.
They're setting it up to say list watch everything, fetch the whole state local, and then pull out like the one secret I need, and that's setting us up for pain.
Well, it's not. Yeah, we will. If we wait long enough, then that'll be the mechanism. It'll be very difficult to get people to change.
I mean, a compromised ingress controller is a scary thing.
Yep.
There's another related thing that we've talked about in a container identity working group, which is having service account tokens mounted per container instead of per pod. So like one of the scary things about ingress controllers right now is the process that's proxying user traffic is also the thing that's loading secrets. This would be a good use case. That's one use case where it would be useful to split apart two containers in that pod and have the proxy running without any privileges and have a controller, not a controller, but like a local manager daemon that has the service account access and is just stamping things out on disk.
All right, in my copious free time, maybe I'll write something up. But if anybody else wants to jump on, go for it too. I just want to keep beating the drum that this problem hasn't gone away, and we're a little bit in the sand.
Yeah, we should probably review the secrets proposal or the secrets roadmap and look at some things to commit to in 1.10.
Yeah, I've been meaning to update that for probably about 3 months now.
Greg, didn't you share a document earlier this week or something like that with a proposal? Or am I mistaken?
Did I share a document on secrets?
Yeah.
There's an old plan for secrets that is somewhat accurate, but needs quite a bit of updating.
Got it.
It was mostly focused on encryption. So.
Yeah, I'd really like to push the thing Mike's been working on, which is giving us the proof point that we can move authorization out of core API server for service account tokens, which opens the door for, or layers so that we can open it to other identity systems replacing Kube, which is a big deal.
I mean, that definitely reduces the exposure, but it doesn't solve the problem that ingress controllers have access to every secret. We're just reducing the number of secrets that the number of things that get stored in secrets, right?
Yeah.
There's some paths because service account tokens are layered into the system that they're helping protect. It makes some things hard to reason about.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But I think the ingress controller today can change how it accesses things to position itself to work in tightly bounded environments.
Jordan,
well, I'm thinking specifically the issue that Moira brought up around the fact that the service account token gets mounted into the thing that's doing the proxying as a reason. Like we wrote Contour. I want to, like right now, Contour runs the controller that actually accesses the API co-located in a pod with the Envoy instance. I think it makes sense to maybe break that out into a separable service that actually doesn't have wide access and essentially lock down that Envoy.
You can definitely already request
I can do it today
to get the cert, and I think, or not to get the token injected, and that mechanism of injecting token is also the point of vulnerability. Really is, give me access to do this. That needs to be explicit and better separable.
All right. Well, if somebody's going to pull together the secret roadmap and review it, I don't know who was talking. Was that you, Greg? I'd be happy to take a look at that.
Yeah, I'll endeavor to update it to the current state, and then we can add some more stuff into it.
That's good.
Awesome. Awesome. Yeah, and we're out of time, so.
Thank you for letting me rail things.
No problem. Yeah, so it sounds like we have some good action items for 110 already. Happy to see everyone planning so early. Yeah. Cool. Thanks a bunch, everybody.